You climb down into the pit before the sun has fully cleared the ridge, the same path worn smooth by feet that walked it before you were born, and the mountain opens up below you the way it does every morning. Not a building rising from the ground, but a temple sinking into stone that was solid rock only a few generations ago. The air down here always smells faintly of dust and cold basalt, even in the warmest months, and the sound of hammers starting up around you, one after another, is close enough to prayer that you've stopped noticing the difference. From up here you can already see the shapes taking form beneath you: a courtyard, a shrine, an elephant frieze along one wall, all of it still half buried in the basalt that hasn't been convinced yet to let it go. Nobody outside this valley quite believes it when you try to explain the work, because the ordinary way of building a temple is to gather stone and stack it upward, block by block, until a shape appears. This is the opposite. You are not adding anything to this mountain. You are removing everything that isn't the temple, working downward and inward through solid rock until the building that was apparently always in there reveals itself, the way your teacher explained it to you when you were young enough to still find that idea more beautiful than frightening. The old masters say the temple already exists, whole and complete, inside the mountain, waiting the way a shape waits inside a block of wood for a carver skilled enough to find it. You are not building anything. You are simply taking away everything that was never the temple in the first place.
It is, depending on the day, either the most humbling idea you've ever been handed or the heaviest, because it means every mistake you make isn't a flaw added to the work. It's damage done to something that was already perfect before you ever picked up a chisel. Some mornings that thought sits comfortably in your chest, a kind of quiet confidence that the shape you're chasing is already real and simply waiting on your patience. Other mornings it feels like the heaviest possible way to think about a single wrong swing of a hammer. The labor itself is unglamorous in a way nobody describing it from a distance ever quite captures. Hammer and chisel, hour after hour, dust settling into your throat and the creases of your hands until you stop noticing it's there, muscles in your shoulders that ache in exactly the same places every single evening regardless of how the work went. Your palms have long since gone hard in the specific places the chisel handle sits, and you can tell, without looking, how many hours a fellow carver has spent on the mountain just by the particular calluses on his hands. Even the sound changes depending on what kind of cut you're making: a dull, patient knock for rough clearing work, and a sharper, more careful note for anything close to a finished surface, and you've learned to trust that sound almost as much as your own eyes. You learned this rhythm from your father, the way he learned it from his own, both of them spending years of their lives on this same mountainside without either one living to see it finished. You remember still clearly the first time your father let you make a cut that actually mattered, standing close behind you with his hand hovering near yours without quite touching it, saying nothing until the strike was already finished. Only then did he tell you calmly that you'd struck at slightly the wrong angle and showed you, without a hint of frustration, exactly how to read the stone's grain before committing to the next one. He told you that day that the mountain would forgive a slow carver far sooner than it would forgive a careless one, and that lesson has outlived every other piece of advice he ever gave you. What makes the work different from almost any other kind of building is simple and unforgiving. There is no correcting a mistake here. A carpenter who cuts a beam wrong can find another beam. A mistake in stone this size, cut this deep into a mountain that will never be replaced, is permanent the instant it happens. Every strike of the hammer is a decision you cannot take back, and you have learned, the hard way more than once, to think 3 strikes ahead of the one you're actually making. It's exactly that unforgiving quality that stops your breath one afternoon, working along a section near where a supporting wall will eventually need to bear real weight, when your chisel exposes something you didn't expect, a hairline crack running through the stone in precisely the wrong direction, invisible until this exact moment, threatening to undermine an entire section of structure that dozens of other carvers have already spent months shaping around it.
You stop mid-stroke, hand suddenly unsteady, and stare at a flaw that has apparently been waiting inside this rock the entire time, indifferent to how much careful work has already been built around it. For one long moment you simply crouch there, unwilling to touch it again until you understand exactly what you're looking at. You do the only responsible thing available to you, which is nothing at all, not one more strike,
until someone with more years on this mountain than you has looked at exactly what you're looking at. The senior carver you fetch doesn't rush, crouching low with a lamp held close to the crack, running a weathered thumb along its length, silent for long enough that your own pulse starts arguing with your patience. This is not a decision either of you gets to make quickly. Too cautious, and months of already finished work around this section might need to be abandoned entirely. Too confident, and a hidden flaw could someday bring down a wall that generations of people will one day stand beneath, never knowing why. He traces the crack's path a second time, further than you'd checked, and finally exhales something that isn't quite relief, but is close enough to it. The flaw runs shallower than it first appeared, he tells you, shallow enough that the load can be redirected around it rather than through it, if the next several courses are angled with more care than the original plan called for. It isn't the answer either of you wanted exactly, because it means slower work, more caution, more hours spent measuring what used to be simple instinct. It is, however, an answer that lets the temple survive the mistake the mountain made long before either of you were born.
You spend the rest of that day working more slowly than you have in months, checking your angles against his correction more times than pride would normally allow. And by evening, the dangerous section is behind you, folded quietly into a wall that will look, to anyone who ever sees it finished, exactly as confident and inevitable as every other wall around it. No one who worships here in future generations will ever know this particular afternoon happened at all. That is, in its own strange way, the entire point of doing it well. Some evenings, walking back up out of the pit as the light goes gold and long across the valley, you let yourself think about how many hands have already touched this mountain and will never see what it becomes. Your father spent decades of his life on a section of wall you now walk past without a second thought. Finished work so early in the project that it already looks to newer carvers like it was simply always there. You wonder sometimes whether he ever stood where you're standing now and wondered the same thing about the carvers who came before him. You have started, without quite deciding to, running your own hand along that section whenever you pass it, the way you once saw him do, though you couldn't have said back then what he was actually thinking about. You will not see this temple finished either. You have made an uneasy peace with that fact the way everyone here eventually does, trusting people you will never meet to carry the same care into stone you will never personally touch, the same way carvers before you trusted it to your own hands without ever being able to check the results. It is a strange kind of faith, working an entire lifetime toward a completion date that belongs, by design, to someone else's future.
What keeps the work from feeling like only sacrifice is the specific, private pride of the pieces that are genuinely, unmistakably yours. There is a single elephant along the base of the eastern wall whose exact expression, the particular tilt of its head, exists because of choices only you made, hours spent on a detail small enough that almost no one will ever consciously notice it, and large enough that you will know exactly where it is for the rest of your life. Anonymous collective labor does not mean nothing here is personal. It means the personal part is simply quieter than you might have expected. By the time you climb back out of the pit each evening, the temple looks a little more finished than it did that morning, though never by an amount anyone could actually measure day to day. You look back once, the way you always do, at the shape still half trapped in stone, waiting for hands that aren't yours yet to finish revealing it, and something in that unfinished silhouette against the darkening sky feels less like an unsolved problem and more like a promise being kept slowly, on purpose, by people who will never meet each other. Modern visitors who eventually stand in the finished courtyard, centuries after your lifetime, will be looking at a single, continuous piece of stone, walls and pillars and shrine and roof, all of it carved from what was, before any of you arrived, simply a mountainside like any other.